So today we're going to talk about the progressive movement. The word progress means to move forward, to improve or get better. And since we're talking about the 1900s and what we've just studied about in the cities and all of that, I can imagine that you all know there was plenty that needed to get better. So at the height of the Industrial Revolution, there were many factors that led to the poor quality of life for many of the new immigrants and for the city dwellers that had already been there. Because remember, so many immigrants were coming in, and the buildings, they could not keep up with adding more and more tenements for all of these people. So eventually there was overcrowding in the cities, which led to filthy living conditions, unsafe living conditions, as we discussed in class, the lack of fire exits, the lack of fresh air and windows, the dirty water, and this all led to disease and death. You should take a moment and write some of these down on your worksheet. So, we can continue. More and more problems, of course, as more immigrants came in. There were only so many jobs, so workers began to be treated poorly. And again, they were able to get away with this because there were so many people. If you complained, or you called in sick, or you didn't show up, there were many, many people just waiting to take your job. So, more workers than jobs, which caused conditions to become very, very bad. You had unsafe and unsanitary working conditions. Of course, there was low wages because there was always somebody willing to work for less money. Long hours, 12 to 14 hours a day, working 7 days a week. And also there was child labor. Children as young as 9 and 10 years old were working in factories and coal mines, out in the fields. And of course, there were few labor unions to protect workers, because as you saw, it was very difficult for labor unions in the early 1900s. Actually, many people died for the right to have a union in their organizations. Many businesses also packaged contaminated products because there were no laws or regulations. Manufacturers could sell without any problems. Meat that was contained with rat droppings, dirt, and whatever else was laying on the floor. The meat packing industry was one of the most filthiest industries in the early 1900s. Contaminated milk often caused babies and infants to die. Medicine that was nothing more than alcohol or turpentine was being sold to the public. All kinds of outlandish ads and propaganda to make them think that they were taking some magical tonic that was going to make them well. Anything from a headache to a backache to a broken bone. Again, you should be writing this down on the list of problems on your worksheet. And then, of course, you say, well, how could this happen? Don't the laws protect us? Well, unfortunately, as you also discussed in class, there were a lot of corruption in the government at this time. Government officials were corrupt, so corrupt that even when laws were passed, they accepted bribes and they turned their heads the other way. So when there were laws passed that you had to have a window in a tenement, the building codes, they were ignored. Health and safety codes were ignored. Health and building inspectors were bribed. When they would go to inspect the meatpacking industries, they were paid and they looked the other way. So things continued to just progressively get worse and worse. Now, as things continued to worsen, finally, there was a group of people called progressives who began to speak out. they earned the name muckraker. This name was given to them by Teddy Roosevelt because he said they were just like the muckrakers who raked up the muck. Muck is filth out of the city streets. And there was a job, there was a muckraker, and they would go around and they would rake the city streets and rake up all the muck. The muck that Roosevelt was referring to, on the other hand, were the people that were practicing these bad business practices. And these muckrakers were willing to do whatever it took to expose this. And it was whether they were looking at working conditions, child labor, bad living conditions, hospital conditions, the medical and food industries, anything that was bad in society, they were going to go out and expose, and they were going to try to get things fixed. Well, the question is, how in the turn of the last century, the 1900s, 1910, 20, how do you do this? You don't have the internet, you don't have television, you don't have any of these newfangled things that we have to spread the word about how things were really bad. So what could a muckraker, what could they do to expose bad business practices, to expose bad living conditions? So what you're going to do right now is, on that worksheet, brainstorm with yourself or with a friend if you so. What you do then? How could you expose, if you were a muckraker back then, how could you expose all of these bad things? What tools did you have to speak out against bad conditions and bad government? And how do you think you might get things changed? See you next time.